Over here, pausa rapidito, buenas saludos. Saludos cordiales, mi nombre es Yadeli Díaz, yo soy la Job Placement Officer. Estamos actualmente trabajando en el programa de red, así que ahora mismo estamos trabajando la parte de comunicación.
So before we continue, how has your trip been around the world?
So far, amazing.
Glad to know.
See what you're doing, yeah.
So now my partner here is going to lead you to.
Pues ahora iríamos a la otra sesión para presentarles los otros saludos.
Para el joven del mes, ser el joven del mes tan
Well, I'm really excited. I learned a lot when I had the opportunity to meet with some really cool people here on the island during this visit. I had the opportunity to meet with the leaders of the Puerto Rico Science Trust. These are people who are leaders in their field, who are experts, who are extremely passionate in what they're doing. And the island's in good hands. And I know that everybody working together is going to really help the economic development of this island. And again, a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's exactly what we need. You know, as a board, we've worked very hard to get the financial troubles in check and to get the boat floating again. And now we all need to work together. And as I met, you know, the leader of the Puerto Rico Science Trust, and we met with the president of the UPR, and understood how everybody's working together and trying to come together to really build the future of the island, I was really excited. I left with a really bright hope of the future of Puerto Rico. And so I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to do that.
Today I'm excited to announce the establishment of the first ever Puerto Rico Federal Statistical Research Data Center, which will provide researchers with secure local access to federal and local data for advanced statistical research and analysis. At its very core, this center creates partnerships that ensures that data security, fidelity, and confidentiality are number one. This center joins a network of 33 other centers across the United States. Only 33 other centers across the United States. Puerto Rico is getting one of them.
I want to thank the U.S. Census for taking this initiative to open the 34th Federal Statistic Research Center. Deputy Secretary Graves and I have had many discussions on data, so it's nice to see those discussions actually turn to action. This center will provide a large set of data more readily available to economists, students, analysts, and us, the Oversight Board. When I think about Puerto Rico's future, I think about what can be, but this requires data. We all have dreams, we all have visions of what we want the future to look like. But how can we make those visions come true if we cannot determine where we stand right now? How can we determine our path to the future without a map? To envision and plan means to study the facts and to quantify information.
The data that we have, especially when we talk about economic development, it's the data the world sees, right? If investors around the world don't see what we have, then they'll underestimate the market of Puerto Rico. They'll underestimate the potential of Puerto Rico.
I want to congratulate and welcome the University of Puerto Rico to this family, and I'm going to call it a family, of researchers across the whole country who are dedicated to doing research with confidential versions of statistical agency data. These data are extremely rich, extremely powerful, and in the hands of good, dedicated researchers can do the kinds of things that improve people's lives.
We too, here at the Oversight Board, depend on data for our fiscal plans, for our budgets, and for the reforms to help Puerto Rico define and conquer its future path towards fiscal stability, economic growth, and prosperity. We can all have different opinions, but we should all have the same facts. Data is the basis for good policy decision making. It is critical to create policies that meet the real needs of the people of Puerto Rico. Policies that are relevant, policy that actually solves problems, and policies that are based on facts.
Comencé a trabajar con el registro por una convocatoria de internado y actualmente soy como estudiante interna del registro de la propiedad con programa del Departamento de Justicia y la UPR.
Para mí la experiencia del trabajo en el registro ha sido excelente. A mí me encanta. Por lo menos entre estudiantes de derechos reales, que el registro de la propiedad cae bajo esa materia de derecho, tiende a ser de las más técnicas, algunos dicen de las más aburridas, pero personalmente a mí me encanta. Las controversias que uno ve día a día. Y un factor para mí muy importante es que esto afecta a muchas personas directamente.
En el plan fiscal se establece como prioridad mantener el registro de la propiedad al día, en tanto que este es un instrumento vital para el tráfico comercial de bienes inmuebles. Cuando estábamos explorando alternativas para trabajar con el registro de la propiedad y lograr poner el mismo al día, surgió la idea de contar con estudiantes de la Universidad de Puerto Rico, que son muchachos muy talentosos, un banco de talento ahí que está latente, y a la misma vez pues les serviría de experiencia a ellos en el mundo laboral.
Usualmente reviso los documentos que se someten, reviso que esté todos los que se solicitan por ley, que estén conforme a lo que requiere la ley, los preparo las minutas, los despacho al registrador. En ocasiones llamo a abogados y notarios para solicitar documentos, así que ese es más o menos mi trabajo. Pienso que es un empleo que es muy bueno para tener en el CV y en el resumen en principio, y pienso que me ha dado buenas experiencias tanto de lo que es el servicio público, aunque no directamente con la ciudadanía y el público, pero es un servicio para ellos, y pues me ha dado conocimiento y destrezas en derecho que, aunque en la escuela de derecho las enseñan, aquí tengo la práctica sobre ellas.
Porque todos mis compañeros son de derecho, digo, mira, si necesitas un trabajo, solicitas registro, pagan bien, las horas son buenas y tienen una experiencia que no se compara, porque si eres un estudiante de derecho, es mejor el trabajo que tú puedes tener estando en la escuela de derecho, algo que tenga que ver con derecho.
Este proyecto ha sido muy beneficioso y ha tenido unos resultados muy positivos para todas las partes en el registro de la propiedad, en la medida en que se ha logrado reducir la cantidad de documentos en un 57% en año y medio, como mencioné anteriormente. Para nosotros en la Junta estamos muy satisfechos con el trabajo que han hecho los estudiantes y el apoyo que se le ha dado al registro. Y los estudiantes pues ciertamente han sido muy exitosos en sus labores y han tenido una oportunidad de tener práctica y experiencia en el mundo laboral real.
In our industry, it's the best time of the year. It's finally starting to have plants blooming. after we pick the fruit, we need to put every a different type of farming organization because my father was not an agronomist or a farmer.
El departamento para cambiar la manera en que se trabaja, maximizar los recursos. Es una gran oportunidad para nosotros, ¿verdad?, colaborar con el Departamento de Educación desde la Junta de Supervisión y estamos bien contentos, nuevamente, bien contentos de estar aquí.
La reforma busca no solamente darle un salario competitivo ahora, pero que el empleado pueda crecer, ¿verdad?, y tener nuevas oportunidades, nuevas experiencias.
Hoy es de esos días que estoy con los compañeros hablando sobre la reforma de servidor público y es sumamente importante porque nos da a los compañeros la oportunidad de una reclasificación, una compensación y un desarrollo continuo. Eso quiere decir que, ¿verdad?, los compañeros le estamos abriendo el espacio para que ellos puedan desarrollarse y yo tener el mejor recurso en el Departamento de Educación de Puerto Rico.
Me parece una gran idea y esperamos lo mejor para los empleados públicos y el buen funcionamiento del departamento porque ante todo los niños deben ser lo primero.
Que incide todas nuestras acciones en una oficina, inciden en el aprovechamiento académico de nuestros niños, en una escuela, en un salón. Y te voy a dar ejemplos básicos. Si no hacemos las compras con la ligereza o la agilidad, no le llegan los recursos a los estudiantes. O recursos humanos, el área de recursos humanos, un nombramiento que no se haga de la manera, ¿verdad?, inmediata. No tengo un maestro en la sala de clase, así que es importante, ¿verdad?
En el sistema, no solamente en educación, yo entiendo que en el gobierno en general también, que pues todos los empleados podamos competir, podamos adquirir una destreza y podamos competir en otras áreas, no necesariamente en las que nos estamos desempeñando.
Ver los empleados entusiasmados, igual de entusiasmados que nosotros en esta reforma, eso es una de las cosas más gratificantes para este proyecto y para el trabajo de uno en la Junta. La parte más importante de una entidad, de una organización, es su empleado. El capital humano es realmente la columna vertebral de cualquier organización y no es, eso aplica también a las agencias de gobierno. Así que si nosotros queremos mejorar el servicio que dan las agencias, que da el Departamento de Educación a las escuelas, a los estudiantes, tenemos que asegurar que tenemos el mejor capital humano en la agencia y que podamos no solamente reclutarlo, pero retenerlo y motivarlo para que ese sea el capital humano el que guíe los procesos de transformación dentro de la agencia. El departamento reconoce que que hay unas áreas de oportunidad, creo que todos sabemos, y el departamento y la secretaria del departamento reconoce que hay unas áreas que necesitan mejorar, que necesitan cambiar. Y a veces el departamento no tiene todos los recursos para ellos transformarse ellos mismos. Así que han reconocido que trabajando esto en colaboración con el equipo de la Junta, pues pueden lograrse y avanzar estos procesos, ¿verdad? Para que ocurran más rápido y contar con el beneficio de la asesoría técnica de la Junta para que estos procesos puedan dar. Al final del día, cuando nosotros pensamos en por qué las cosas no llegan a las escuelas, por qué los materiales no llegan o por qué los maestros se tardan en reclutarse o en procesar esos procesos de recursos humanos, pues nosotros entendemos que el poder mejorar la experiencia del servicio público para poder retener y poder reclutar el mejor talento, eso va a incidir en que las áreas operativas, que son las que se encargan en darle esos servicios a las escuelas, los servicios a las escuelas puedan mejorar, y a los servicios a las escuelas mejorar, pues mejora, ¿verdad?, lo que está recibiendo el estudiante.
Por su esfuerzo en reconocer y hacer justicia a los bomberos de Puerto Rico. José Néstor Tirado García, presidente, dado hoy 17 de enero de 2024 en San Juan, Puerto Rico. Y reconocer y hacer justicia a los bomberos, eso es lo mismo que le estaba diciendo.
Gracias a ustedes por el trabajo que ustedes hacen.
Segundo programa es Short Form Credentials.
Okay.
La diferencia, tienen algo parecido, pero la diferencia es que los Short Form Credentials no tienen que ser universidades. Pueden ser cualquier proveedor, que eso fue una de las grandes oportunidades que nosotros vimos. En Puerto Rico no existen muchos proveedores, especialmente en esta área de credenciales cortos. Este programa a mí me fascina, porque yo sí creo que va a dar un cambio en el ecosistema brutal. Claro. Porque estamos añadiendo una capacidad, una oferta que no existía.
Estamos añadiendo infraestructura al ecosistema que no existe.
Y estamos trayendo proveedores de afuera que vienen a disrupt, como yo llamo, ¿verdad?, a cambiar el juego, a crear una competencia que no existía. Lo que provee esto, que es distinto a lo de la universidad, las personas que no entran a la universidad, esto es una alternativa para ellas. Las personas que están en alguna carrera y quieren hacer un cambio de carrera, esto es una forma bien, no quiero decir fácil, porque todos estos programas son complicados, pero costo efectivo y eficiente de hacerlo.
Se han identificado sobre 300 plazas, tanto en las regiones como a nivel central, en las áreas de finanzas, contabilidad, manejo de fondos federales, tecnología, compra, para fortalecer el departamento con capital humano, con destrezas que no tiene ahora ni a nivel central y a nivel de la región. Lo importante es que voluntariamente, y esto fue una decisión que tomaste, de que nosotros estábamos trabajando a nivel central una reforma de reclutamiento que no la aplicaba el Departamento de Educación, utilizando unos procesos alternos y la tecnología, la inteligencia artificial. Y fuiste a donde nosotros y nos dijiste voluntariamente, nosotros queremos que estos reclutamientos nuevos pasen por el proceso de la reforma de servicio público en el gobierno central usando tecnología artificial. ¿Por qué tomaste esa decisión de solicitar insertar al departamento los procesos de reforma de reclutamiento?
Cuando me hacen muchas entrevistas, me hablan de la transparencia y de los colores y cuán politizado puede estar el departamento. Una vez cuando me lo traen, ahí yo vi la manera de despolitizar. Porque parte de lo que hemos hablado de reclutamiento
es que está enmascarado, como ustedes me usan la palabra, ¿verdad? Esa es la palabra.
Sí, los nombres...
Que no se ven esos nombres.
En la plataforma que se está utilizando, ese primer screening, los nombres de las personas que están solicitando en la plataforma están enmascarados, o la persona no puede ver el nombre para decidir a quién pasa la entrevista.
Te digo, como le decía, ¿verdad? Hay gente que me dice o me hablan de la parte política, de color en el departamento y qué voy a hacer. Fue la alternativa.
Good afternoon. I am Arthur Gonzalez, the new chairman of the Federal Financial Oversight Management Board for Puerto Rico. I would like to welcome everyone joining us today for the Oversight Board's third public meeting of 2024, which is our 45th public meeting overall, and which is being held at the Puerto Rico Convention Center. To begin our meeting, I would like to start with a roll call to formally determine if we have a quorum. Dr. Andrew Biggs.
He is present.
All right. Mr. John Nixon. I think Andrew is present. He's joining by Zoom, I think, but we'll wait for him to connect.
I am present. Andrew was on the screen, so
Oh.
you may just be on mute, but John Nixon is present.
All right, thank you. Dr. Betty Rosa.
Presente, present.
Mr. Juan Sabatera. My understanding is he's unable to make the meeting. Mr. Luis Abinas.
Presente.
And myself, I am here. And our ex officio member, Governor Pedro Paroisi.
Present.
Thank you, Governor. Andrew, have you connected yet? By voice? All right. Having a quorum, and the meeting is now called to order. Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to thank our former chairman, Professor David Skeel, for his exceptional service as a board member for nearly 8 years. Over the past 4 years, David led the board as its chairman, successfully reducing Puerto Rico's debt and being helpful in trying and attempting to stabilize its finances. We all wish you a great deal of good luck, David, in your future, and we greatly appreciate what you have done. Further, I would like to thank my fellow board members for designating me as chairman of the Oversight Board on an interim basis. As some of you know, I've been a member of the Oversight Board since its inception in 2016. We have come a long way since then, and I am looking forward to continuing to work with the board, the government, and you, the people of Puerto Rico, to ensure Puerto Rico is on the right path towards growth and prosperity. As well, I have the pleasure to formally welcome our newest board member, Luis Ubiñas, to his first public meeting of the Oversight Board. Luis is a leader who brings significant experience from business, public sector, and nonprofit sector to the board. We are thrilled to be able to work with Luis on our core mission. Lastly, I would like to congratulate Cameron McKenzie for the President's recent announcement of his intent to appoint him as a member of the Oversight Board. His appointment is not yet effective, but we are looking forward to having him and hope he will join us in our next public board meeting. I understand, Luis, that you would like to make some quick remarks.
Voy a hablar en inglés porque evidentemente ese es el lenguaje que usamos. Pero it's a pleasure to be here and it's an honor to be here. Es un honor. Mi familia es de Aguadilla. Somos Ubiñases y Felicianos. But above all, it's a real responsibility. And I want to thank all of you, all my board members for having me. It's really a blessing to be able to come back to the island, an island that my entire family's from, and to be able to contribute in this way, to volunteer my time and efforts to try to leave the island a stronger and better place for my sons, someday my grandchildren, for all of our children.
Thank you very much, Luis. And again, welcome. Very happy with you joining the board. As usual, at these meetings, I would like to ask our General Counsel, Mr. Jaime A. Alcari, if he would be willing to act as secretary for this meeting. I see that he said yes. I would like to thank everyone watching the live stream of this meeting via Oversight Board's website, www.oversightboard.pr.gov. The audio of this meeting is available in English, and there is also a simultaneous Spanish translation. Additionally, the meeting is being translated into sign language. If you log into the English language website, the audio will be in English, and if you log into the Spanish website, you will hear the simultaneous translation. As usual, we will be handling any questions and comments from our online participants through a form that is available on our website. You can find this form on the live stream page and complete it by putting your name and adding any questions or comments you may have. You can post comments or questions until 15 minutes before the end of the meeting. We will provide answers on our website. We also will give an opportunity for any live comments towards the end of the meeting. We have the following agenda items for today. Approval of the minutes of the public meeting and executive sessions of the Oversight Board. Administrative matters. Update from the Executive Director, update on economic development, remarks from Governor Pieroisi, public commentary, other matters, and adjournment. The first order of business is to approve the minutes of the last public meeting, which was held on June 5th, 2024. The minutes are attached to the meeting materials as Appendix A. We also need to approve the minutes from a series of executive sessions held since the public meeting. Those executive sessions were held on June 14th, June 21st, June 28th, June 30th, July 17th, July 19th, July 26th, August 16th, September 6th, and September 13th, 2024. Those meetings are attached to the meeting materials as Appendix B. Are there any questions about the minutes? There being no questions, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Nixon, would you take a look at the...
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to approve the minutes of the Oversight Public Board meeting held June 5th, attached to the meeting materials as Appendix A, and the minutes of the executive sessions held on June 14th, June 21st, June 28th, June 30th, July 17th, July 19th, July 26th, August 16th, September 6th, and September 13th, which are attached to the meeting materials as Appendix B in the form presented to the meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Andrew. I would like to ask for a voice vote. First, all in favor, please say yes. Those opposed, please say no. And if you are abstaining, please say abstain. All in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, all of the board members having voted in favor, the motion passes and the minutes are approved. Next, we will have a couple of routine administrative matters. Would someone make the first motion?
Mr. Chair, I would like to make the following motion. Between the adjournment to this meeting and the opening of the Oversight Board's next public meeting, the Oversight Board may consider in executive session any and all matters that it is authorized to consider under PROMESA, including first, any certification determinations authorized per PROMESA, including certification determinations under Section 206 of PROMESA. Second, any submissions for authorizations authorized per PROMESA. And third, any filings authorized under Title III of PROMESA, in each case that are set forth as part of the vote to convene such executive session. The Oversight Board may also act by unanimous written consent between meetings in accordance with its bylaws, with such consent to include consent by electronic transmission.
All right, thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Rosa. Would all those in favor please say yes? Any opposed? Say no, and any abstentions, please indicate so. Those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion has passed. We have one more motion which relates to unanimous written consents. Would someone make the motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to confirm and approve the unanimous written consents adopted by the Oversight Board since the adjournment of our last public meeting, which are included in Appendix C to the meeting materials.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. We'll take the vote. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All of the board members present having voted in favor, the motion passes as well. Next, we will move to the substance of today's public meeting. I will open the floor to our Executive Director, Robert Mujica, for an overview of the Oversight Board's work since our last public meeting held in June of this year. Robert?
Thank you, Judge Gonzalez, and congratulations again on your designation as our chair. Together with the other board members, you built this organization and defined its principles. Your firm integrity in helping Puerto Rico overcome its deep fiscal crisis and resolving the largest public sector bankruptcy in U.S. history, and your constant voice for support of the fiscal plan reforms have been invaluable. The staff and I are grateful for your continued leadership and guidance. I would also like to welcome our newest board member, Luis Ubiñas, a leader who brings significant experience from business, public service, and the nonprofit sector to our board. President Biden also announced earlier this month his intent to reappoint current board members Andrew Biggs and John Nixon to the board. And lastly, although his appointment is not yet effective, Cameron McKenzie, a resident of Puerto Rico, will be joining the board. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate Andrew and John on their reappointment, and we're looking forward to having Cameron join the board. I would also like to thank David Skeel, who has worked with many of you to ensure that Puerto Rico gets on the path of recovery and stays on the right path. Under his leadership, the Commonwealth debt restructuring was concluded, and that reduced Puerto Rico's government's debt by 80%. And together with you, Judge Gonzalez, David Skeel was instrumental in shaping the PREPA debt restructuring process. We owe David a huge debt of gratitude for his service on the board and his dedication to Puerto Rico, and I wish him all the best for his future. Now with Dr. Betty Rosa as well, we now again have 7 members, and this board composition has strong ties to Puerto Rico. And together I'm confident we will keep working towards fulfilling our mandate to help Puerto Rico achieve fiscal responsibility and market access. Since the last public board meeting in June, you certified a $33.3 billion consolidated budget for the current fiscal year 2025. Total spending increased by a fiscally responsible 3% from the previous year, and that budget provides for funding for all critical areas in Puerto Rico, including education, healthcare, public safety, social welfare, and economic development. It prioritizes initiatives that support strong financial management and economic growth. However, just as the Oversight Board worked with the Legislative Assembly on a budget that the governor could sign and you, the members of the Oversight Board, could certify as a compliant fiscal plan, legislators introduced a group of bills in the final days of the legislative session that would spend close to $1 billion more than what was agreed to in the budget proposed by the governor. No resources were identified to pay for that additional spending. The legislation would have increased spending by over 9% instead of the responsible 3% we worked on with the governor and legislative leaders up until that point. This spending would have put the budget out of balance almost immediately, and we would have to go back to the drawing board and figure out a new budget. It is clear that the days of spending beyond budgeted amounts and without identifying resources for long-term fiscal balance are not yet behind us. We worked with the legislature, and new language was added to the final budget resolution that will now require a certification of how any spending bills will be funded in the budget. The new language and acknowledgement is only a first step. Unfortunately, some legislation was passed before we agreed with legislative leadership on this language, and that legislation complicates balancing the budget. What is crystal clear is that the budget process in Puerto Rico must be reformed further. We outlined the details of these reforms and the path to a fiscally responsible budget process in the fiscal plan for Puerto Rico that you certified during our last public board meeting in June. Reforms to the budget process must happen in order to restore long-lasting fiscal responsibility. The legislative actions this past June make the case for budget reforms present and clear. We also analyzed the most recent audited financial statements for the Commonwealth, and after reviewing the audited financial statements for fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2022, we concur with the independent auditors that the report shows a $3.3 billion deficiency in the general fund on a modified accrual basis, the accounting standard under PROMESA. We continue to be concerned about the deficiencies in internal controls, which have been identified by the auditors and have not yet been addressed. On debt restructuring, the mediation for the PREPA plan of adjustment is ongoing. Following the June ruling by the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit on the extent of the bondholders' collateral and the recourse recourse claim against PREPA, and the U.S. District Court extended the stay on all PREPA plan of adjustment-related proceedings until October 8th of 2024. Puerto Rico's overall debt restructuring process did nevertheless take a very significant step forward. On July 25th, 2024, the Oversight Board asked the U.S. District Court of the District of Puerto Rico to close the proceedings under Title III of PROMESA to cut the COFINA debt. The restructuring of COFINA's $18 billion in legacy bonded debt is the Oversight Board's first Title III case. It became effective in February of 2019, and the COFINA plan saves approximately $17.5 billion in debt service payments. Almost 50% of COFINA's revenues that previously belonged to the creditors will now go to the Commonwealth's general fund budget. We expect the U.S. District Court to close the case soon and close that chapter of bankruptcy. On economic development, stabilizing Puerto Rico's finances, breaking decades of deficit spending, and reducing the crushing debt burden have been our signature achievements working with the government. You, the members of the Oversight Board, gave me a clear mandate. Let's focus on economic development now that the fiscal situation is stable. Budget process reform remains a critical gap in Puerto Rico's recovery process, but so is an economy that continues to grow reliably when federal stimulus money runs out. Our revitalization coordinator, Jose Perez Riera, has focused on our role here and how we can contribute to not only Puerto Rico's fiscal recovery, but long-term economic recovery. There is no shortage of economic development plans for Puerto Rico. We have reviewed 150 plans, studies, and reports. We met with stakeholders, economists, members of the business community, investors, about what is needed to get Puerto Rico to sustainable economic growth over the long term. Some necessary initiatives are already described in the fiscal plan. Many initiatives come from the government. Investments in infrastructure, reforms to make it easier to create and grow businesses here, increased labor participation. These structural reforms are the foundation for economic growth, but we have to go further. Today, Jose Perez Riera will provide the board with an overview of the Oversight Board's next steps. Reliable energy is as much a key to the Commonwealth's economic success as it is to the quality of life in Puerto Rico. It is a condition precedent to everything else the government and the board must accomplish. That is why energy reform was one of the first reforms that the Oversight Board backed. Working with the government, we broke up failing PREPA that resulted in an energy system whose policies were governed by political and special interest influence and a dramatic lack of investment. Today, Puerto Rico retains ownership of this valuable asset, but day-to-day management was transferred to private operators. The Puerto Rico Energy Bureau was strengthened into a truly independent regulator, now overseeing the power system. We created a plan to implement the will of Puerto Rico's elected leaders to move aggressively toward renewable energy. Those are the right building blocks. And after decades of mismanagement and underinvesting, we cannot go back to the old system. We cannot go back to PREPA. But one of those building blocks has come under attack recently: the Energy Bureau's independence. Only a politically independent regulator is an effective regulator. Act 10, however, constitutes a clear act of political and special interest interference with the Energy Bureau's authority, which is why the Oversight Board commenced litigation. Special interest groups just recently boasted in a court filing that they lobbied for months to persuade the government to employ political influence to interfere with the purpose and job of Puerto Rico's independent regulator. While Act 10 is directed at net metering, the Oversight Board's concern is not net metering. Renewable energy is a key element of Puerto Rico's energy transformation, and net metering is a very important tool for making solar more accessible and more affordable. The Oversight Board supports net metering. Contrary to what some of those who profit from a weak regulator would like the public to believe, invalidating Act 10 would not change the current net metering program. The critical building blocks are in place to continue the transformation. We could not achieve any progress at all without the structural changes, particularly breaking up the dysfunctional PREPA. However, we are far from done. Electricity is not yet reliable, and we must have an honest conversation based on facts. We experience too many power failures, and while some are necessary scheduled power outages to allow for a maintenance of a system that was in disrepair, far too many outages are related to a grid that lacks sufficient capacity and has been badly maintained for decades. The energy grid continues to fail the people and businesses of Puerto Rico. The improvements in the grid infrastructure and reliability are not where the people of Puerto Rico expect them to be this many years after Maria. This is partially because the investments to improve the fragile infrastructure have not happened. After Maria, the grid was restored to operational capacity just to get the lights turned on. However, in addition to the FEMA funds that got Puerto Rico back on its feet after the hurricane, Congress authorized over $17 billion in funding so that we can stabilize the energy system and improve its reliability. To date, not enough of those resources have been deployed, and as a result, we are operating with much of the same grid we had before we even started the transformation. Substantially, this is the same grid that failed the people during Hurricane Maria. The federal government, through FEMA, is providing $17 billion to improve the grid. However, only approximately $1.2 billion of this federal money has been spent 7 years after Maria. We need to move faster to improve and renew this grid. This is not a question of oversight. This is not a question of planning. This is a question of doing. There is oversight, and we have the money. It is also not a question of whose fault it is. It is a question of managing and getting things done. I am often asked, how was it done in New York? How did we build an entirely $3.6 million long Mario Cuomo bridge faster than anyone thought possible? How was a brand new LaGuardia airport constructed, not just a terminal, an entirely new airport, on the same site as the old airport without ever closing the airport, even for 1 day or 1 hour? Federal funds came in, state funds came in, federal and local permits were required, as were environmental approvals. The answer is government and contractors, planners and builders. Nobody did it alone. We all worked together with one single purpose. These projects advanced to completion because of effective operations management, prioritization, support from a bureaucracy, and an unwillingness to accept no for an answer. Improvements can happen faster. I'm not an engineer. I have seen projects language, and I have seen large-scale projects happen faster than anyone thought possible. And the difference is nonstop, focused attention, prioritization, motivation, and incentives. The current situation and pace is not acceptable and should not be normalized. I do believe with effective leadership, operations management, prioritizations, and support from the bureaucracy, improvements can happen faster. These are not easy tasks. It is difficult, and it requires confronting obstacle after obstacle, day after day, with creative and non-traditional solutions. Pointing fingers and attributing blame accomplishes nothing in this instance and may, in fact, set us back. I believe in accountability, and there are easily a dozen government agencies that play a role in the deployment of funds. That is why the Oversight Board brought all the energy players together, our team and the government, LUMA and Genera, Core 3, P3 Authority, the Energy Bureau, FEMA, and the U.S. Department of Energy. Governor, you sent the Secretary of State, which is how important the issue is, and we appreciate it. The challenge is that we have billions of dollars made available by the federal government specifically for Puerto Rico's energy grid, and Puerto Rico has not been able to inject those dollars into the grid as of yet, and the pace required for what is at stake. Every day that these funds are not deployed is another day that the people of Puerto Rico are at risk of being without power. We have lost too much time, and this is not a legal contract exercise, nor is it an accounting exercise. Lack of execution is an operational challenge, and that challenge is ultimately the responsibility of us and the government. Yes, there are legal and accounting concerns, but at the end of the day, the grid must physically be improved. The focus has been on obstacles, not how we overcome them. What I heard in the intense meetings was about problems, not solutions. Projects designed but not funded. Work was paid for but not reimbursed. Contracts were hired but not working because approvals are missing. These are not trivial issues. Getting reimbursed from FEMA is a process. Getting permits takes time. Nonetheless, management of the projects, the execution of the day-to-day deployment of the resources is the responsibility of the government. I know this because I have seen it and I have lived it firsthand. But let's not focus on the roadblocks. Let's focus on how to remove them. We need to prioritize the projects that we can get done right now, and federal agencies need to expedite approvals and waivers. Members of the board, our staff, and I will take much more active role in the process of helping to remove roadblocks. We have no desire to micromanage the process, but we also have a responsibility to do whatever we can to facilitate the effective deployment of these resources now to improve the grid. Federal funds are available for this initial stage. Judge Gonzalez, Andrew Biggs, you were here when the Oversight Board tried to take a very active role years ago. A previous government blocked the idea of appointing the Oversight Board's revitalization coordinator as PREPA's chief transformation officer back in 2018. Instead, we focused on implementing PREPA's fiscal plan and created a system that can and will improve. But nobody took on the task of actively managing the system. We are now asked to be more involved privately and publicly by members of Congress who have specifically asked us to assist with permitting and support federal and local agencies. What we need to do is double down on the operational side and simply get what needs to get done faster with more boots and trucks on the ground. Focusing on contracts is a distraction from what we need to get done. I have not heard any convincing reason why we cannot do this. I believe we will get there. Recently, as a result of our meetings with Core 3, who has been working very hard to overcome obstacles, they've committed to pre-review approximately $240 million in Hurricane Fiona expenses, which should help significantly accelerate reimbursement timelines. And more than a dozen other requests for reimbursement that were delayed because of additional clarifications that were needed or because there was missing documentation are now closer to moving forward. This includes helping the parties resolve a $21 million issue and dispute for work that was already completed to repair streetlights and certain other work orders. We anticipate these efforts and their impact on the energy restoration process will continue to expand. Resolving delays in the system means that other projects that depend on FEMA funding can move forward now because liquidity is available to advance payments for these projects. However, this is not enough. We must keep pulling every lever we have at our disposal to speed up the pace to improve reliability. We are in the process of developing a new fiscal plan for PREPA, which will provide additional insight into the fiscal picture of PREPA, both on the revenue side and the level of investment needed to maintain the grid in the state of good repair. I am convinced that we will see change. Electricity will become more reliable and cleaner. We will pick up the pace. The people of Puerto Rico depend on it, and we have no other choice. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Robert. I will now open the floor to any questions or comments the board members may have. Hearing none, we will move on. I'd like to welcome Jose Ramon Perez Riera, our Revitalization Coordinator, to provide an update. Jose Ramon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Executive Director Mujica, Governor Pierluisi, and other members of the board. I am Jose Ramon Perez Riera, and I am the Revitalization Coordinator for the FOMB. I'm here today to provide an update on our work in economic development. The board, through the fiscal plans, has supported initiatives, investments, and structural reforms as the foundation for economic growth. But as the Executive Director noted in his remarks, we must now go further. We started a process 6 months ago to go further, to deepen our work in the economic development. To date, we have engaged extensively with leaders from across the private sector, nonprofits, and government. We reviewed all available past or current planning efforts, and there are quite many. And we engaged in a rigorous analytical work to understand our economic drivers and our competitive positioning. Among our goals is to identify priority opportunities and initiatives that can help catalyze economic growth across Puerto Rico. We are equally focused on developing an approach that results in lasting impact. In doing so, we plan to build a process that allows for continuous updates as lessons are learned or as new priorities emerge. And we are very focused on developing an implementation approach with a bias towards action and results. In this presentation today, I will provide an update on the Economic Development Plan in 3 different parts. First, I'll share an overview of the approach to developing the plan. I'll share how this effort has considered previous plans and how we expect this plan to be different by design, how we propose to take this plan forward. Second, I'll share an update on the findings to date. This will include a view on the historical economic performance in Puerto Rico and highlight early insights into the key strengths and challenges that we observe across the economy today. Third, I'll share how we plan to take this effort forward. Here, I'll highlight the emerging priorities. I'll also share how we plan to develop a foundation for implementation that will drive results through collaboration, engagement, but also through continuity and transparency. Let's start with an overview of the approach the development of this plan has taken to date. As a reminder, the FOMB, through the Commonwealth's fiscal plan, set the imperative to facilitate and coordinate economic development efforts in support of enhancing outcomes and growth. We have taken up this mandate to launch a broader economic revitalization effort focused on the design of an integrated plan for the economic development of Puerto Rico. As outlined in the fiscal plan, we hope and expect this plan to provide a roadmap for targeted investments and structural reforms that can help Puerto Rico accelerate its growth for decades to come. Our efforts to date further follow the direction of the fiscal plan by including extensive engagement with leaders across public, private, and nonprofit sectors to reflect the potential partners and actors in advancing these goals. We have worked in close collaboration and partnership with the government, primarily with the Department of Economic Development and Commerce. We have also worked closely with government leaders from relevant departments, including the Department of Labor, Healthcare, Housing, Infrastructure, among many others. To date, we have engaged with more than 125 stakeholder groups, representing over 30,000 voices in a variety of formats and different forums. We've logged nearly 900 hours of input and are grateful of the participation of many perspectives into the creation of this effort. We engage with subject matter experts, private sector leaders, and government agencies alike. And as I'll discuss, we view this engagement as simply a starting point, something that will continue to grow and evolve over time. Our intention is that this effort becomes the single most comprehensive community engagement effort in economic development in Puerto Rico's history. The process also undertook an extensive review of recent and historical economic development plans. We reviewed more than 150 plans and studies, including more than 40 economic and fiscal plans developed by the government since 1975, more than 80 economic studies created by industry associations, economists, and research groups, and more than 30 policy papers or studies on specific economic drivers like labor force or housing. Through this review, we quickly recognized that Puerto Rico does not have a shortage of plans or a shortage of good ideas. Rather, we face challenges translating these plans into long-lasting growth. We intend for this plan to design an approach to overcome these challenges. In our review, we noted that many plans have failed to meet their objectives because they are structurally unable to deliver on the results. The challenges that limited these previous plans include the following. 1, a lack of continuity. When leaders or conditions shift, areas that require long-term commitment aren't sustained and progress gets lost. 2, poor coordination between government and the private sector. This coordination limits the ability to bring the best of each sector's respective expertise. 3, the negative impact of our political cycles. 4-year political time horizons can hinder programs that require commitment beyond these timeframes. 4, bureaucratic inertia, which can create challenges to execution. 5, fund mismanagement, where investment is often not aligned with the highest return or impact areas that need to be focused on. And 6, limited accountability and transparency of efforts and results. We believe that this economic development effort should be built differently in order to have lasting impact by addressing all of these challenges. To do so, we have identified and are committed to finding ways in which this plan can be different, including the following. First, integrating this plan into the fiscal plan on an annual basis. This will allow for an evergreen plan that can adjust to the times and is insulated from changes in leadership or pressures of short-term political planning cycles. Second, positioning the private sector to act as change agents in order to foster plan continuity beyond the existence of the FOMB and help support coordination and implementation efforts. Third, prioritizing long-term enablers, for example, workforce labor participation, energy reliability, healthcare, among many others. Many of these areas have the potential to drive the most value for Puerto Rico, but require planning and implementation that transcends a 4-year cycle. Fourth, establishing new governance systems for the plan's implementation. This will include setting targets for key initiatives and building capabilities to enhance execution. Fifth, leveraging the FOMB's ability to manage funding allocation and exercise oversight. This plan can develop an investment roadmap consistent with the fiscal plan that supports initiative owners to execute. And 6, assigning specific cross-sector collaborators and creating public transparency to drive accountability for results. Let's now transition from our approach to some of the findings to date. It's important to review where we have come from before in order to set a view on where we have to go in the future. In this review, we note several periods in our history, decades if not longer, where economic performance in Puerto Rico, our growth rate, actually exceeded that of the United States overall. From the 1950s to the 1970s, we experienced rapid industrialization as we shifted from an agriculture to a manufacturing-based economy, led in great part, I would say, by Operation Bootstrap. In the 1970s and 1980s, after Section 936 was introduced, Puerto Rico continued to outperform the U.S. mainland. This was also a moment, however, that the United States economy started the shift from manufacturing to the services sector. Puerto Rico's economy did not make this transition at that time. When the phase-out of Section 936 started in 1995, the expected shift from manufacturing reliance did not take place, but the effects were not immediately felt. However, Puerto Rico began to rely on government intervention in order to maintain productivity and employment levels. Puerto Rico's public debt increased from $4 billion to $19 billion from 1995 through the year 2005. Over the last 20 years, Puerto Rico's economy has effectively stagnated, and this is also a period marked by economic shocks, whether the completion of the Section 936 phase-out, the 2008 financial crisis, Hurricanes Irma and Maria, the bankruptcy, and/or COVID. As we are now post-debt restructuring, Puerto Rico's economic indicators across population, employment, and productivity have begun to stabilize. The resulting picture of economic performance highlights the challenges and the imperative of changing our economic trajectory. Puerto Rico's economy has traditionally moved in lockstep, if not outperformed, the U.S. economy for sustained periods of time. We now seem to have diverged from the U.S. economy with a sustained period of trailing performance across key indicators. Puerto Rico's real GNP growth has lagged the U.S. GDP growth on average by nearly 3 percentage points per year since 2004. Employment growth has effectively been flat while increasing 20% in the United States, and population has declined by 14% since 2005. We realize that this effort comes at an inflection point for Puerto Rico's economy, but there is significant reason for optimism. Economic growth is not only an opportunity, it is an imperative given the current context in which we find ourselves. Puerto Rico's finances have stabilized, breaking decades of deficit spending, and the crushing debt has been reduced to sustainable levels. Economic development activity has expanded in Puerto Rico and requires new levels of coordination in our signature efforts, whether public-private partnerships, restructuring, reconstruction, or identifying how to respond to global challenges in sectors and in technology. We also know that there is an unprecedented level of federal funding, approximately $100 billion, that's been allocated for Puerto Rico. Deploying these funds will require new levels of collaboration to generate the maximum benefit. We also recognize that partnership between FOMB and the government of Puerto Rico can provide more local capacity for economic development activities. And finally, the FOMB can allocate significant resources to an economic development plan that reflects the island's needs while also enhancing the adoption of the plan at all levels. This economic development plan aims to leverage this moment by implementing strategies that address both historical challenges and future opportunities, with the goal of creating a sustainable and inclusive economic model that will benefit all Puerto Ricans. As we have commenced the development of this plan, we designed a comprehensive framework to consider and analyze all aspects of the Puerto Rican economy. We have reviewed the core sectors of the economy, including production, consumption, and the knowledge-based economic sectors. We analyzed cross-cutting enablers such as infrastructure, healthcare, education, and public safety. We've reviewed economic policies, strategies, and planning efforts, including fiscal responsibility and key administrative processes. We have combined the thorough diagnosis of Puerto Rico's economy with our review of previous economic efforts and extensive community engagement to develop our initial insights. The diagnostic highlighted several foundational strengths that the plan should focus on and build from. First, we have many production and consumption sectors that are assets for our economy. Areas like biopharmaceuticals, medical devices, and tourism have been historic drivers of economic performance and are positioned to continue to be drivers in the near future. Second, there are strengths in several of our service sectors. These sectors, including financial services, insurance, and professional services, are high-growth areas globally. Third, we have pockets of high-priority talent with expertise and in-demand skills. Skills like biomedical sciences and engineering. Meanwhile, Puerto Rico has lower labor costs than all of the states in the United States, creating an attractive environment for investment. And we have a significant diaspora that we can also leverage to drive growth at home. Fourth, we have a high connectivity infrastructure supporting movements of goods and people across the island and to major international markets. Fifth, we have a growing startup ecosystem with robust levels of entrepreneurship. Among U.S. peers, Puerto Rico ranks 6th in startup density, defined as the share of total firms that are less than 1 year old. 6th is our attractive tax and incentives climate, favorable rates and attractive programs for key sectors, and a regulatory environment which is aligned with the United States. We also see, however, that for each of these strengths, there are associated challenges that we must address to unlock the next wave of growth. First, many of our key sectors have started to experience trailing performance. Historic drivers of growth, such as manufacturing, have slowed and now trail the U.S. rates of growth in GDP and in job creation. Second, our economy has underrepresentation in tradable services sectors. These sectors are drivers for growth across the U.S. and many economies globally, yet they represent less than half of the share of the economy relative to the U.S. This means that Puerto Rico risks missing growth waves like the tech sector or other professional and business services. Third, our shrinking population and labor force is straining the availability of in-demand talent. which can hinder industry growth. Puerto Rico's population has declined by 500,000 over the past decade, leading to significant labor shortages. Furthermore, our labor force participation rate stands at 46%, which is well below the 63% in the U.S. mainland. This gap is likely due to multiple factors, including a high prevalence of informal work and systemic barriers to employment. Retaining, reattracting, and reinvigorating our talent is a key enabler for future growth. Fourth, our infrastructure varies in its reliability. Power, transportation, and digital assets all lag on key performance indicators. Electricity is expensive and unreliable. Roads are undermaintained, and digital connectivity is not equitable. These challenges hamper the likelihood for companies to invest in Puerto Rico and hurt individual and business productivity. Fifth, we experience lagging innovation outcomes. Puerto Rico ranks 50th in the United States in venture capital funding per capita and 51st in academic science and engineering R&D as a percent of GDP. Six, there are challenges in the ease of doing business in Puerto Rico. We currently rank 65th in the world in the ease of doing business. Permitting takes about 160 hours and tax filings take about 185 hours on the average, and Puerto Rico ranks 143rd globally in dealing with permits and 161st in registering properties. These findings are meant to be an input in developing initiatives and investment plans to address key challenges and catalyze the next wave of growth. As we reflect on these findings and consider the path forward, we recognize there is significantly more work and collaboration that's required. While we have made great progress through the analysis and engagement, we are now ready to further prioritize, plan, and start to implement efforts. This shift will require additional stakeholder engagement, including public engagement, to test the findings and the priorities. Over the coming months, we will start to look toward the implementation of this new framework for growth, including establishing the project management structures to ensure the plan can be implemented effectively. The path forward will also start to prioritize the areas that we expect to be the highest impacts towards our growth goals. Several opportunities have emerged as priorities throughout our initial diagnostic and engagement. The priorities fall roughly into three categories with three main pillars in each of these themes. First, growing high-potential economic sectors. This includes revamping attraction and expansion efforts for our priority sectors such as biopharma, medical devices, tourism, financial services, and professional services, among others. We must also address the ease of doing business as well as continue to unlock federal support for economic growth. Second, boosting Puerto Rico's skills, labor force participation, and population. This includes growing, retaining, and reinvigorating our talent. We must produce more of the skilled workers that employers need. We need to address our lagging rate of participation, and we need and must continue to make progress on retaining, returning, and attracting our talent back to Puerto Rico. Third, investing in infrastructure and innovation to enhance productivity. This includes addressing the performance of our infrastructure assets to keep up with growing demands in the 21st century. We must also build on the emerging strength of our entrepreneurial system. And finally, we must further streamline government operations and service delivery. Through the Economic Development Plan, we have begun to identify strategic initiatives that Puerto Rico can pursue across these three themes, and we will further refine and prioritize these focus areas. As the identification and prioritization of initiatives continue, we also recognize that the Economic Development Plan is meant to be an evergreen effort. We have started by reviewing and building on prior economic development plans and undertaking a robust engagement process. As we look to the future, we will continue to evolve and refine this plan and continue to incorporate input from all stakeholders. Notably, we plan to work with the government based on their planning effort and jointly refine and identify priorities for inclusion in this economic development plan. We also recognize the importance of building the right infrastructure for implementation, including governance structures to ensure execution while allowing the plan to evolve as conditions change and lessons are learned. As mentioned in this economic development presentation, the plan will harmonize with the reporting and the refinement process of the fiscal plans. In doing so, the FOMB can create the plan's implementation as well as support continuity. We anticipate that each new fiscal plan will have initiatives and goals reflecting the economic development plan's priorities to drive economic growth for the island. Finally, as we look even further ahead, we are also committed to ensuring the sustainability of this economic development effort during and beyond the leadership of FOMB. There are several measures that we plan to take to ensure this continuity. We plan to identify responsible collaborators that are accountable for the success of specific initiatives. Most of these collaborators we expect to be outside of FOMB, both at the public and at the private sectors. We are also committed to building capabilities, equipping initiative owners to successfully execute on their goals and their plans. Finally, we plan to develop public-facing updates. We expect these will provide transparency and increase private sector and cross-government collaboration. In closing, I want to reiterate my appreciation of the Executive Director and the Board for setting the imperative to develop this plan and this initiative. I want to thank the hundreds, if not thousands, of stakeholders that have provided their time, their effort, expertise, and insight to this effort. These inputs have helped us shape an emerging perspective on how we can catalyze growth and return to the levels of economic performance that we have seen throughout our history, rather than what we have experienced in the last 2 decades. I also want to thank Secretary Sidre of the Department of Economic Development and Commerce and Governor Pierluisi for their partnership in this effort to date. We appreciate Propósito as a strong foundation for this plan, instrumental in the insights gathered to date. We expect that this plan will continue to build from those efforts. We also hope and expect that the plans from incoming administrations will provide similar contributions to our shared growth objectives. This economic development plan is well underway, with significant work left to do to advance our goals. We recognize the imperative this plan must respond to, and we take with great responsibility the mandate to advance this plan. We look forward to moving towards action and delivering real results to recatalyze economic growth across Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose Ramon. I would like to now open the floor to any questions or comments the board members may wish to make. There being no further comments or questions, I would like to turn the floor over to Governor Pedro Pierluisi, who would like to make some remarks. Welcome, Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will give some general remarks concerning Mr. Mujica's presentation update, as well as Mr. Perez Riera's economic development update. I will not comment or respond to everything you talked about because it was quite lengthy, and I don't want to prolong this meeting beyond its purpose. But let me start with the Executive Director's presentation. Mr. Mujica expressed concern on behalf of the board about bills that were approved by the legislature of Puerto Rico towards the end of the legislative session. And even before there was an agreement as to the process that needs to be followed in approving bills from the point of view of the expenditure involved in the same. I'll say one thing to the board to ease your concern. I'm the one who reviews those bills, and I'm the one who decides whether to sign them or not. And when you look at what I have been doing, I am definitely taking into account whether the bills were approved without taking into account their fiscal impact. And if you see me signing any bill that was not covered by the budget as we envisioned it and as the board certified it, you'll see that it's because our OMB, Office of Management and Budget, has identified an existing spending item or budget item that can be reprogrammed, and you will be getting a reprogramming request from us so that the bill that I sign falls within the budget. So I'm not going to allow, and I will not approve any bill that causes our budget not to be balanced, because that is an item of fiscal responsibility that is very important that we meet, particularly when we are looking forward to the day when we no longer need an oversight board in Puerto Rico. So take my word, and I'm doing the job. I'm working with AFAF, our fiscal agency, working closely with Hacienda as well, our Treasury Department, and definitely OMB, which is your counterpart. Okay? So that's my commitment. In terms of energy reform, let me say this. The toughest challenge that Puerto Rico has collectively in terms of its economic development and its quality of life is the state of our electric system, the condition of our electric system. And during the last close to 4 years now, we've been facing this challenge. And I agree that the way to work this out, to face it, to overcome it, is through teamwork. Teamwork on the part of, you mentioned dozen entities involved. I agree, it's probably even more. But definitely you're talking about the private operators in the system. You're talking about the Energy Bureau. You're talking about the board itself. You're talking about Core 3. You're talking about FEMA. You're talking about HUD through the CDBG, DR, and MID programs. You're talking about EPA, Fish and Wildlife. I can go on and on and on. There are so many agencies, plus the local ones, that are involved in this process. And what I'll say is this. Much of the funding, no, not much, all of the funding you mentioned, Mr. Mujica, the $17 billion that Congress allocated and FEMA allocated for the purpose of reconstructing or rebuilding our energy system were not really available until mid-2021 for different reasons. The way FEMA works, the fact that in the prior years, FEMA and the government of Puerto Rico were basically spending emergency funding and public assistance, individual public assistance funding that was available to Puerto Rico. Since mid-2021, quite a few things have happened. And I have to say on behalf of the government of Puerto Rico, and actually I can even quote FEMA, we've been very creative in dealing with the bureaucratic hurdles that the FEMA programs have in and of themselves. And I'll just give a couple of examples. And I'm saying this, and I don't want to sound defensive at all, because I'm looking forward to the next 4 years when I am not going to be the governor of Puerto Rico. But it is important that we keep being creative, that we keep being collaborative, so that we take full advantage of the $17 billion that you talked about. Things like the Working Capital Advance Program. FEMA has never worked based on advances of funds. FEMA has always worked based on reimbursement of funds. And a lot of projects in Puerto Rico, including in the energy front, were stagnated because of lack of cash flow. So our Core 3, Manuel Lavoy and his team, came up with this idea, and FEMA ended up buying it, that we should be able to advance 25% to any proponent, so long as the obligation has been made, and then 25% more, and it can go as high as 75%. And that has, in terms of the total reconstruction in Puerto Rico, that has been night and day. And it's definitely helping even the private operators in our energy system, but because when you look at the actual disbursements up to today, it's about $1.2 billion. And a lot of that is coming from working capital advances. And for example, I'll just mention this, we need electronic intelligent meters in our grid, because we want an intelligent grid to handle everything, including solar systems that are being interconnected all over the place at a rate that is exemplary. But the meters are being purchased as we speak. You're talking about easy $500, $600 million more. No, it is exactly $800 million through working capital advance. So the expenditure, you'll see that there will be an incredible uptick in the next month or two, from 1.2 billion to about 2 billion, just because of this creative idea of the government of Puerto Rico, the Working Capital Advance Program. Vegetation management in Puerto Rico, when we talk about our energy system, is very important because actually we live in the tropics. And a lot of the transmission and distribution lines become compromised because of the vegetation. We were also very creative. FEMA, for the first time ever in its history, is spending federal monies to clear vegetation at the tune of $1.2 billion. And it's starting, we're pushing the private operator to speed it up and work it out with FEMA, but that's going to make a difference because roughly 45% of electric service interruptions in Puerto Rico are due to vegetation issues. So that makes a lot of sense to do, and we're doing it. Another thing we did, and this was after Fiona, we sat down with FEMA and with DOE and all the players again. Actually, President Biden came in and he said, whatever the Gov wants, he's going to get in the context of the crisis. So I said, we need help. We need additional generation. We got it from FEMA. 350 megawatts of additional power using generators that burn LNG, natural gas, which is less costly and less contaminant than the alternatives. So we did that. But let's go one step further. That was a special mission. A task force was created and a special mission lasting about a year and a half at most. And when the time came to actually stop it, because this was emergency assistance from FEMA, we said, we need the generators. We cannot turn them off. Our system barely can handle this. We have 40-year-old plants. Now, lately, even the private plants are failing. So we need this temporary generation. And FEMA did something else it had never done. It basically allowed us to use roughly about $350 million of FEMA funding to acquire the generators without affecting the funding or using any of the funding that FEMA had allocated in the first place. That's another thing we did. And all I'm saying is we need to keep it up in the future because other challenges will appear, and you need to work like this, closely with our federal counterparts, closely with the board, closely with the energy regulators, so we keep facing this tough challenge, the toughest challenge we have. Lastly, I'll mention that I'll mention what you mentioned. Basically, you praised Core 3 because it is working with Luma, the private operator, in speeding up the funding, the reimbursement that the private operator Luma needs because of expenses it incurred during Fiona, responding to Fiona. And you mentioned there is roughly $40 million that our Core 3 will funnel quickly to Luma, and I agree. And that was something, again, thought out of the box. I'll stop there because my main point is this one. The important thing here is, well, we're in the middle of an electoral year and politics sometimes get in the way. It's easy to talk the talk, to talk the game, to come up with magic bullets, and the going is tough. And I have told all these candidates that they better start realizing it. We're not going to fix this system from one day to the next.
No matter who's in charge, whether you cancel a contract, you appoint anybody, it's not. What's going to make a difference is the teamwork you talked about. And it's really addressing this collaboratively, creatively, and with full determination. And I am sure there's a bright future for Puerto Rico, including in this energy transformation that is in the making. Now, let me address some of Perez Riera's remarks. First, you mentioned propósito. Propósito was basically something, actually talk about being creative. Our Department of Economic Development and Commerce, Mr. Sidre, you mentioned, and his team, Humberto Mercader is here, his right-hand person. They came up with the framework for the sustainable economic development of Puerto Rico. And I noticed that the way you are presenting what you propose on behalf of the board happens, which is having a long-term economic development plan, is very consistent with what Propósito is all about, because Propósito had 5 pillars. I'm checking my notes. I don't want to misspeak here. But one of them is making sure we integrate all the components of our economy. Basically, not being multi-sectorial, because our economy has strengths in multiple sectors. So it's a matter of integrating them all. And you basically do the same because you mentioned them. Promoting entrepreneurship in Puerto Rico, because that's very important. And business climate that you talk about, the ease of business that you talk about, is crucial for having a vibrant economy and entrepreneurship at the level we all wanted. I'll just simply mention, as you know, that we've been updating, improving the single business portal that is used in our permitting system. And I'm not going to belabor you with the stats, but the stats look promising. It's a matter of continuing that effort. We've been digitalizing our government services, and by the way, that's an area, I was going to mention it, but anyway, it's an area of growth. Technology is growing in Puerto Rico, and a lot of entrepreneurs are in the technology sector. And that's something we should continue promoting. CESCO, the entity we have for purposes of dealing with motor vehicles and so on, it's totally different. I mean, you're transferring titles through the web, through the system. That was never the case, and I can go on and on talking about that one. The third pillar in Propósito deals with having a competitive workforce. And with the board's blessing, we devoted a lot of funding, $50 million for the 21st Century Tech First initiative, so that we add 50,000 digital jobs to our economy in the next 10 years, and that's going forward beautifully. It's multi-sectorial in the sense academia is involved, the private sector is involved, the kind of thing that you were proposing in the plan that you were describing, which I like. At least your presentation. And we've been using WIOA funds creatively, which we should, to develop our workforce, and we should continue doing it. We have extended school hours, 3 more school hours in 600 of our 850 schools. And we use that time for things such as technology, arts, it could be homework, sports, depending on the school and its facilities. The next pillar of Propósito deals with infrastructure. And now, let me give you just a tidbit, because also this gets politicized, and people, and it gets me a bit exasperated, because a lot of people talk without really having the data. It's like they think they can say anything, and since pretty much anything gets published these days through social media, among other places, it's amazing. They keep saying stuff that is wrong, and people start believing it. Let me say this, and FEMA has said it. GAO has said it. Let me start with GAO. GAO, the General Accounting Office of the United States, has said that the largest and more complicated disaster management effort is the one happening here in Puerto Rico due to Maria. Let's start by that. This is the largest natural disaster that FEMA is handling along with Puerto Rico, according to GAO. And FEMA has said that I'm quoting, that we should be viewed as a case in point for other jurisdictions and states in the mainland in terms of how we're handling the FEMA funds we have. You can look it up. This is in the FEMA's April report to Congress, basically praising what we're doing in Puerto Rico. Now, some people say, hey, it's been 7 years since Maria. This is going too slow. Now I'm talking about the total reconstruction. I'll give you the exact number. We have spent up to today 45.5% of the FEMA funds allocated to Puerto Rico due to Maria. So roughly, it's like we're at the middle point. And you might say, well, the middle point then becomes that this is going to take 14 years, perhaps even 15. Well, let me give you some tidbit. If you compare Puerto Rico with New York and New Jersey, in terms of what they did after Sandy, and if you compare Puerto Rico with Louisiana and New Orleans, in terms of what they did after Katrina, we're doing as well or better. And this is something that is out there and anybody could vet it. So the pace of this funding is adequate, of the spending is adequate in terms of the total reconstruction. And that's in terms of FEMA funds. By the way, those funds for the permanent jobs, for the permanent projects, were not available until mid-2020 because of the reasons I mentioned before. In case of energy, it was about mid-2021. In the case of everything else, it was about mid-2020 because of the way FEMA works. CDB, GDR, and MIT are programs that HUD has that are important as well. And I'll just give the stats for a moment. So far, HUD has obligated $11.5 billion on these two programs. And we have spent 32% of the funds that have been obligated, $3.7 billion. And you might say, ooh, that's going slower. Well, I'll tell you why. Those funds were not available till mid-2021. I'm talking about the DR program, Disaster Relief Program, until 2023 in terms of the mitigation program. So we've been working with HUD, relieving the Biden-Harris administration, I should say, that has been removing bureaucratic hurdles we were facing. And so that's going on pace according to HUD itself. So in terms of infrastructure, which is one of the pillars that you're talking about, we've been doing the right thing. The important thing is that we continue doing it in the coming years. And some say, hey, what's going to happen when there's no longer this federal funding available for CapEx, for infrastructure projects in Puerto Rico? Well, you're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, hopefully, and we should all be working towards this, Puerto Rico will have regained adequate access to the capital markets, and will do, I see Omar Marrero nodding, our fiscal guy, and we'll do what other states do, which is you go to the markets, not to finance operating deficits of your government, but to finance infrastructure enhancements throughout your economy. And that's what Puerto Rico will be doing, in a way, through the markets, supplanting this federal funding that we have had available in these last years, and in the coming years because of the natural disasters. I am not going to belabor, but the fifth pillar is the welfare, social welfare, and we're addressing it, and you recognize that that's an important area. So, to close, I agree with the principle that we need continuity. I agree with the principle that it's good to have a long-term economic development plan in place. I agree with your effort to incorporate this concept into the fiscal plan that the board certifies and amends from year to year, because at a minimum it addresses 5 years as opposed to 4, which is the political cycle, and it has information going forward up to 30 years or more. So I endorse your effort. I think it's well meant, and one thing that I hopefully, as governor, for the next couple of months, will happen in the coming years is that Puerto Rico continues to grow on a sustainable basis, on a consistent basis. It has grown the last 4 years at the tune, on average, of about 2% per year. It has the lowest unemployment in its history now. You mentioned 46% participation, labor participation. We haven't had that labor participation in many years. It's been like a 5% increase. So all the different statistics are showing that we're doing reasonably well, so the important thing is to keep it up. Some say that this is all about federal funding. I do not agree. Manufacturing, which you mentioned, medical devices, it's vibrant, sophisticated pharma, biotechnology, is growing. They don't get any federal funds due to Maria or what have you. The tourism sector in Puerto Rico, with the exception of some ARP funds that I devoted to the promotion of Puerto Rico, but basically I decided that we should be using for promoting Puerto Rico. The tourism sector has been growing on its own. It's organic growth, unprecedented growth. Technology, I mentioned, is growing, and I agree. We should continue expanding our services sector and promoting, as DDEC has been doing, the exportation of services, because it is an area of growth. So even though I'm leaving office shortly, I am positive about the future of Puerto Rico. And I am glad that the board will now be ensuring that we not only put our fiscal house in order, which we have been doing, but that we also continue growing, continue having more revenues, and continue balancing our books like we should, so that we regain access to the markets and we no longer need the board. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Governor. Much appreciated. Any board members, Robert, have any questions regarding the governor's presentation?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just make a comment and just let the governor know that I really appreciated your leadership and working with you. I really appreciate the team that you've assembled, Secretary Marrero, Juan Carlos Blanco, and others who have been part of your administration. I hope the people of Puerto Rico really understand how passionate you've been as governor. You look at the Commonwealth debt that we restructured, the savings to the people of Puerto Rico, those are going to be benefits for years and years and years that your leadership and working with the board has really paid off. I know that we haven't always agreed on everything. I think that's the nature of how we are structured, but I really think you can be a proud governor as you wrap up your service, and I look forward to keeping in contact with you and your team. I really do have a profound respect. Having been a government employee myself for 20 years, I know that you took over in a very difficult situation in Puerto Rico, and I think a lot of progress has been made. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I certainly just want to thank you for all your dedicated service and what you've done, and especially the team that you've assembled. It's been a pleasure to work with them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Governor, for everything. We wish you well and your staff well as well. All right, no further comments. We'll now conclude the substance of today's meeting. Understand that members of the public have submitted some comments, so I'll now turn to that.
Thank you, Chairman. We have some comments on the back. Please come forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Javier Rua Jovet. I'm a Chief Policy Officer for CESA, the nonprofit trade association that houses and represents the solar and battery companies in Puerto Rico. Always grateful for this opportunity to address the board. Mr. Executive Director, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Governor, members. Number one, it's a three-part message, but number one, I'm feeling very hopeful. I would like to commend also the statements by Mr. Perez Riera, who's shown a really open, collaborative spirit, forward-looking. That's very positive. I'd like to congratulate this new, renewed board, fiscal board. Congratulate the new chairman. We're already seeing a difference here. There is, in the past, these meetings were 2 days in advance. Now it's, we have more time in advance. The most important thing I want to say now is that we filed today in the comment pane a 7,000-person petition asking this new, renewed fiscal board, 7,000 Puerto Ricans asking this board to withdraw the lawsuit against Law 10. I'd like to commend the governor for presenting a strong defense of this law already. Also the Senate of Puerto Rico. This law simply changes the potential net metering sunset date to 2030. And it's under the paradigm of any normal jurisdiction that the legislature sets policy and the regulator implements policy. We are all a type of interest. Yes, I am a type of special interest. I represent solar companies. There's civilians, there's civil society, there's environmentalists. All Puerto Rico parties, we all agree that net metering, and you also say that you agree with net metering. If we all agree with net metering is the most important policy to keep solar growing, to keep saving lives, let's please withdraw this this lawsuit and keep it up. I mean, I think there's hope out there, and we are hopeful that we can find a better way forward. Thank you.
I appreciate it, sir. We will review what you submitted and react accordingly. Thank you.
We have another question.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is David Ortiz, and I'm the director of Solar United Neighbors here in Puerto Rico. We tried to enter the lawsuit recently by the FOMB against Law 10, and the FOMB went against our participation. I find it interesting, given that you said that you're looking out for the interests of the people in Puerto Rico, yet in the lawsuit itself, you're trying to quiet the voice of the people of Puerto Rico who we represent. So quickly, I wanted to say that we're here, just like Cesar was a few seconds ago, asking that you withdraw your lawsuit of Law 10. Net metering for, specifically after the presentation of our economy and our economic future, is key to that. We've seen in the 7 states in the US where net metering has been changed or canceled, what has happened economically, what has happened in terms of jobs, and what has happened in terms of the energy transition, no matter how cheap they try to sell those systems. And you're screwing that up. And I wanted to say that. In Puerto Rico, we have a comment that we say, or a saying that we have. When you say that what you're trying to do is look out for the PREB, and that the PREB had no participation in this process, well, that's a cheap excuse. In Puerto Rico, we call it una excusa barata. I know, 30 seconds. And después el turno de ella, ¿verdad? Okay. Because they had a voice in that process. They actually supported the passing of the bill. So that's just an excuse, because for a long time, you've been trying to cancel that metering. Look out for the people of Puerto Rico. Cancel the freaking lawsuit.
Thank you, sir.
Pues mi nombre es hermana Guidalis Meléndez, represento a las organizaciones sin fines de lucro. Soy religiosa de las Hermanas del Buen Pastor. Tenemos una organización sin fines de lucro que cuenta con placas solares desde hace ya varios meses y la medición neta. Ha sido una oportunidad porque por lo menos en las organizaciones hemos recibido un aumento sobre un 33% en gastos operacionales, lo que significa un gran trabajo para quienes administramos este tipo de organización que brinda ayudas necesarias a las comunidades pobres de Puerto Rico, como es uno no se imaginaría que en Guaynabo, San Juan, donde estamos ubicadas, en la carretera número 1, hay gente que pasa hambre, hay gente que necesita hospedaje y mucha necesidad de salud mental. Si nuestros recursos que estamos recibiendo, la ayuda de Medición Neta, van dirigidos a otros tipos de gastos, es quitarle este tipo de ayuda a nuestros participantes. Así que es una petición de que se trabaje a favor de las necesidades de nuestro pueblo y de quienes servimos.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
There being no, excuse me, I apologize. I'd like to thank Robert, our staff, Governor Pierluisi, his administration, and all of you for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be handing any additional comments and questions through the Oversight Board's website. Does any board member have any other matters to discuss today?
Mr. Chairman, I would also like to just publicly thank Chairman Skill and his dedicated service as a board member, and certainly welcome our new members of the board. I'm really excited. We have 7 members now. I'm honored and humbled to have been reappointed myself. I certainly joined the board not for the restructuring, but for the best financial management and making the changes that we need to make sure that we don't dip back into bankruptcy. And I'll tell you, after working with Mr. Salvatore and Luis and Cameron McKenzie and the others I've worked with, I know that the board is well poised to work hand in hand with the government to make sure that this happens. So I think we've accomplished a lot, but there's still a lot yet to do, and I just am fully committed as a board member and excited to continue to serve.
Thank you, John. All right, any other matters? Since we have no other matters to cover, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Vote. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any
Yes.
opposed? Any abstentions? None being heard, the motion passes. And we will adjourn until, we have a time? All right, we'll adjourn until our next meeting. Thank you very much for your patience.